All right, so thank you so much for that. That was basically exactly what we'd hoped for. What we'd like to give you next is what every engineer loves, which is a little bit of disaster porn. For those of you who have facilities in New York or live in the Northeast, you're certainly familiar with the effects of what was Hurricane and then Superstorm Sandy. Dan Golding is going to be moderating a panel. We've got some great participants, Equinix, Internap, so on and so forth, that are here to basically tell you their experiences. Dan will lead some Q&A, and I think we'll all get a great idea, A, of what happened, and B, what we should all be thinking about for the future.
How's everyone doing this afternoon? Yay! How's everyone doing this afternoon? All right. Get a little post-lunch energy in the room. So we're about to have a really interesting panel. Hurricane Sandy was a couple of months ago, so I know we've all promptly forgotten about it, but it taught us a lot of very, very interesting things about internet infrastructure. So now that we've had a little bit of time to reflect on exactly what happened, and we've had some time to actually maybe fix some of the things and get people back in their homes and get the data centers and pieces of infrastructure that were problematic, now that we've had a chance to sort of get them working again, this is going to be a session where we're going to talk about sort of what went wrong and frankly, what went right. So today we're going to be talking about the infrastructure impacts. And by infrastructure, I mean hard stuff, data centers. There'll be another session later on in NANOG, I believe tomorrow, that's going to be on the sort of the routing and sort of the logical aspects of what happened around Sandy. Now, some of the folks you see up on stage, I'll introduce these folks, but these are folks who are sort of unusual coming to NANOG. They're folks who are data center operations professionals. In a lot of cases, you're their customers. So definitely start thinking of some good questions to ask these folks, because we don't normally see folks from companies like Datapipe and DuPont Fabros. We see Equinix folks, but not necessarily folks from sort of the critical facilities operations side of the house, and the same from Internap. So it's great to have those folks with us. My name is Dan Golding. I'm a data center strategy consultant and also a member of the NANOG Board of Directors, and I'll be moderating today's conversation. So first, Superstorm Sandy, what happened? Who here was in some way affected by Hurricane Sandy? Anybody? Good portion of the crowd. It was a pretty unpleasant situation. October 2012, it was the largest Atlantic hurricane on record. Had Category 2 winds, which is certainly not the highest, but it was a really big storm. There were a lot of meteorological things that I don't completely understand that essentially gave it a vast area of impact. The estimated damages were in excess of $65 billion, and that includes things like loss of business, but also there were a lot of hard losses. There were a lot of houses, there were a lot of data centers, a lot of things that were destroyed or damaged. And there was both significant flooding and wind damage. I think for our conversation today, a lot of the discussion will be around flooding. The greatest damage was in the New York and New Jersey areas. And one reason that's very important is because unlike a lot of hurricanes that may hit in the Carolinas or may hit in rural Florida, these are very built up metro areas. And that had some real impacts when it was time to start remediating the situation. Not just in terms of how much damage occurred, but in terms of trying to get the right folks to the right locations. It was very, very difficult to do. One thing that's very important here is some of the prime data center territory. Most of us know where the big data center markets are, but certainly in the area that was impacted by Hurricane Sandy, and by the way, this is just a cool picture. This is not a data center. This is a tall sailing ship that was sunk by Hurricane Sandy. The prime territory here was in downtown Manhattan, and also there's sort of a crescent in northern New Jersey, just south of Manhattan, where there's a lot of data center. There's significant interconnection in places like 60 Hudson, 111 8th Avenue, 65 Halsey. But on top of these, there are a whole bunch of additional data centers, many of them smaller, in Manhattan that were severely affected. And it's not just the internet. This is not just about internet interconnection. It's not just around internet hosting. There's a large financial exchange business. So an awful lot of the trades that go on any kind of exchange, be it the New York Stock Exchange, the NASDAQ, a lot of high-frequency trading. This stuff is going on in many of the same data centers that we might use for websites, for software as a service, for internet interconnection. We don't even realize that they're there. We're not sure why the big banks are in the cage next to us, but it's so that they can execute trades very quickly. That made them vulnerable to the same situation that Sandy caused. The primary issues, and we will delve very, very deeply into this in the session, were flooding and the availability of diesel fuel. Generally, well-prepared data centers did better. There were some cases where well-prepared data centers, due to reasons entirely outside of their control, had some issues. Some data centers inside larger buildings were at the mercy of the building management. One thing we frequently don't realize is, especially in these major metro areas, there's our data center provider, our co-location provider, our interconnection provider, but there's also a building landlord. Good examples are 111 8th Avenue, used to be owned by Takana Capital Partners, it's now owned by Google, 350 Cermak. A lot of folks there have cabinets, and Equinix is Chicago 1 or Chicago 2, but the building's owned by Digital Realty Trust. So there's interaction between the folks who operate co-location facilities, and in some cases the building landlords. In a lot of cases that interaction is positive. In some cases, however, they're active competitors of each other, which can cause a dynamic that may not be positive if they're both fighting over diesel fuel. I think this situation also reinforced some problems that some of us have been seeing in the idea of converting high-rise buildings into data centers. Some data center authorities, like the Uptime Institute, have long been skeptical of the idea of converting buildings into data centers. For example, a 20-story building in Manhattan versus a purpose-built building or a tilt-up warehouse that you convert into a data center. There are real issues in trying to have a vertical data center versus a horizontal one. I think there were also questions raised about the availability of diesel fuel inside constrained metro areas. In other words, if you've got a metro area that's really only reachable via a number of bridges, or there are choke points, it doesn't matter how good your contracts are, sometimes it can be pretty tough to get the diesel fuel that you need. Today's panel has a cross-section of major data center, interconnection, hosting, co-location providers. Again, these are not the kind of folks we normally see at NANOG, but they are vendors for almost everyone in this room, so I think it's very important to listen to what they have to say. The folks up here were operational management. They were in direct control of the situation. These are not marketing people. These are engineers who were on the ground managing the situation. They were tactical leadership. Today's panel, and I'll ask these folks to introduce themselves. Michael Parks, Chief Technology Officer of Datapipe, which is a managed hosting and data center company in the New York metro area. Scott Davis, who's Executive Vice President of DuPont Fabros Technology, which is a major data center real estate investment trust. Michael Poleshuk, who's Senior Director of IBX Operations for Equinix for the Northeast region. Neil Crowley, who's Director of Data Center Operations for Internap. So starting with Michael, can you introduce yourself?
I'm Michael Parks from Datapipe. I'm Chief Technology Officer and also in charge of the data center operations worldwide.
Can you give a little bit of your background?
I don't really have a good story for why I'm a data center operator. I was actually a helicopter pilot in the Coast Guard, but there's no good segue between the two. But I have electrical engineering background, which rolled into ensuring power availability in our data centers, and we hired specific people to help us plan for events like this and ensure power. I think it worked out well for us during Sandy.
Good. Scott Davis.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Scott Davis, Executive Vice President of Data Center Operations, DuPont Fabros Technology. That chiefly means that I'm responsible for the day-to-day operations of our 10 active data centers in 4 regions in the United States. Other responsibilities include the design of new data centers and facilities. My background is in electrical engineering. I started off in the simulation arena, building simulators for the military, and then I moved into building and designing data centers, did that for about 10 years, and then became an owner-operator and have done that for about another 15 years.
Great. Michael.
Good afternoon, everyone. Michael Poleshuk. I'm Senior Director of IBX Operations for the Northeast region. I'm responsible for day-to-day operations and everything what's associated with operation of the data center. in the Northeast region, which is 9 facilities. My background is in electrical engineering. I've been in operations throughout my career of 30 years. I thought I've seen it all until the Sandy happened, and there's much more to learn, as I found out. So that's pretty much it.
Great. Neil.
Neil Crowley. I'm the only guy up here who forgot to wear a jacket.
Hey, me too.
I director of operations for Internap. I run 4 data centers in the Northeast, Boston and New York City. My background, I guess, is pure operations. I've been in the cellular industry and IP industry for about 20 years, and for the past 14 years, been running data centers. So.
Now, right before we get into our various talks, the format of this is going to be that we've got a couple of slides from each of the panelists. These are very revealing slides. Folks are going to be very honest about what happened to their data centers and the lessons learned during Hurricane Sandy. After we have each of the 4 presentations, after they're all done, we'll go into some Q&A, both up at the panel and in the audience. Please be sensitive to the fact that unlike what we normally see from network operators, you're going to see a very significant degree of candor today from these data center operators. So as you question them, and don't say, well, why did you do X? That's the dumbest thing I ever heard. Just remember, when network operators have an outage, they very rarely stand up here and say, this is what happened and this is what we learned from it. So I have a lot of respect for these guys for coming up here and doing this today. So, Neil.
Okay, folks, as mentioned, I'm Neil Crowley, the only guy without a jacket except for Dan. The data centers that I guess I'll talk to you guys about are the ones that are in Manhattan. Some of you guys may be customers there, but I'll probably focus most of my talk on 75 Broad Street, which is lower Manhattan. So make sure I get this thing right here. There we go. From my perspective, what we did with Sandy was we pretty much got ready for this thing. And to get ready for it means that you need to be ready every day for it. So when we talk about operational readiness, it's maintenance, lots of maintenance. It's daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual, triannual. It's a lot of routine stuff that is pretty mundane and boring, but if you're missing those things, then you're probably not going to be ready for Sandy or whatever event may be coming. So this is a little bit of a sequence of how we prepared for Sandy. The beauty with hurricanes, if there's anything nice about them, is that they tell you that they're coming for a long time. So in this case, we were able to activate our emergency activation plan 96 hours in advance. Gave us plenty of time to plan our people, plan our suppliers, pretty much exercise critical infrastructure, and then get communications plans going. So that was our timeline. That's what we expected, and eventually we got into event response, which for 75 Broad Street meant that Con Edison was shutting off the power proactively. So we lost power at 75 Broad a few hours into the storm, just in advance of it, and that effectively got us into our sequence of operations, which normal circumstances is ATSs, UPSs, generators firing up, that sort of thing. So, let me make sure I'm too close. There we go. So, event response went well up into a certain point, and then when the Atlantic decided to come visit us and knock on our doorstep, we got into disaster recovery mode. The building that we were in got swamped with 2 stories of water, from a basement level down. So there was 3 feet of water in the street of 75 Broad that took out the building's fuel systems, took out the building's utilities eventually, and left us with a 1,000-gallon header that kept our generators going for about 10 hours. So we stayed up for a while. It gave us some time to get fuel suppliers lined up and that sort of thing. So we went into disaster recovery mode pretty quickly. And there's a couple of aftermath things. For us, one of the challenges was people. So we had our emergency activation plan. We got our people lined up, but some of those poor people couldn't leave once this thing happened. They were trapped in Manhattan, which meant that some of my guys were working for 36, 48, 72 hours nonstop before they could get relief. So those are one of the challenges, is that people were pretty much stuck there. Similar challenge with suppliers. As Dan mentioned, getting fuel into the city was not an easy task. We lucked out. In our case, we were able to find a supplier, and the picture below is a roll-up fuel system that we were able to get. We were only able to get that fuel because it was trapped in Manhattan. So it was actually in Manhattan at the time, and couldn't get out, couldn't get across a bridge or through a tunnel. So critical infrastructure, certainly with Con Ed keeping things dark for a long time. I think Con Ed had pretty much everything from 42nd Street down off because of storm-related issues, flooding of the underground utilities and that sort of thing. So we were challenged at the site too with communications, because as soon as people started to lose power to their own data centers or their telecommunication hubs, cellular landline communications became really difficult as well at the site. So, and then event response. Our event response was pretty good up until this point. When you get into a situation where your emergency fuel supply is floating around in the basement of the building, your normal event response it doesn't account for that sort of thing. So a little bit of a challenge for us. I borrowed this term black start operations from the utilities. Black start operations is effectively the little generator getting the big generator going. And in this case, our black start operations was the roll-up fuel systems there that we had to get creative about. We basically pulled hoses up to a mezzanine level. We filled our header, and those fuel systems kept us alive until we got utility restored. So. Some quick, there's an interesting picture there. I don't know how well that shows up, but the picture in the top corner there is the doorway at 75 Broad Street. And if you look closely, you can see the Atlantic out there. Roughly 2 feet of water just outside of that building. Did not take long for that water to get into the building and fill the basement. So pretty interesting picture there. I guess a key takeaway for us is, and we're working with building owners, Dan mentioned some of the challenges of owning a high-rise is that somebody else owns it usually. So in this case, building owners in this one need to work on ways of getting utilities elevated, get them out of the basements, get them up to levels where they can be serviced or protected, where they're not victim, where they fall victim to flooding and that sort of thing. So emergency fuel systems, one of the things that we're looking at is figuring out a way to submerge or make our fuel systems totally submersible. Fuel is lighter than water, and if it's sitting underneath 2 stories of water, it's going to want to get up and move. So in this case, fuel tanks got up, floated around the basement, and released a lot of diesel fuel into lower Manhattan. So pretty scary stuff. Another thing, certainly a key takeaway for us was that, our black start operations didn't include quick connects for fuel. Basically, being able to roll fuel tankers up. So, one of the things we're going to look into is getting, more prepared so that things can roll up. That would include water. The buildings ran out of water at some point. So, if you've got a system that relies on water, you're going to want to make sure you can get some water into the building. So, and I guess the very last thing, FEMA has been pretty active about updating maps and such, after this disaster. As they did with Katrina. So, if you're interested to see where you may fall or where your data center may fall, you may want to take a look at that link and see what FEMA currently says about your location. So that is, I think, all I had, Dan. There you go. Michael.
Good afternoon, everyone. You look pretty bored by now, so I'll try to be very brief and short. I only have 56 slides to go. Just kidding. So when Dan asked us to prepare this presentation, the first kind of a short presentation, the first thing came to mind is like 3 slides. Hey, huge storm, we survived, let's move on. Then I start thinking, what exactly does it mean? Yeah, it's really a huge storm. That was the largest storm, the largest hurricane on record, spanning 1,100 miles. So in its path, In its past, we had 4 main metro areas, which is DC Metro and Philadelphia Metro. They were not really affected. They had some power fluctuations, but not anything significant. Boston was spared. Everything kind of passed Boston to the side, and we didn't have any issues at all. And obviously, as Dan mentioned before, the major issues were in New York, New Jersey area. So, excuse me. Throughout the New York, New Jersey area, we had a widespread outages power outages in Manhattan and New Jersey, specifically in Secaucus, where we have three major data centers. What we did experience, the major impact that we experienced was at NY9 facility, which is at 111 8th Avenue, Google building. We had 4 outages there. 3 outages were attributed to the landlord infrastructure. Well, obviously, diesel generators. If you don't know by now, what is the most important piece of equipment in a data center? It's a generator. And what is the second most important? It's backup generator. So we experienced that firsthand. The landlord's generators failed, and that was a major issue. One of our generator also failed due to fuel supply. The fuel supply at 111 8th in that building, everybody getting fuel from the main building tanks, which belongs to the landlord. And that was another issue, that debris stuck in the pipe. So we had, it was our generator, and it just went down. So 60 Hudson Street. 60 Hudson was another issue. That was our issue. The generator ran, and then a speed sensor failed, and the generator went down. We were able to restart it quickly now, but still, we encountered a big outage. In New Jersey, in Secaucus, obviously 165 holes in Newark they weren't affected at all. In Secaucus, all our facilities went on the generators. We had no issues, power issues whatsoever. Just a quick kind of anecdotal story. I've been in a facility. I've been walking around maybe 3 o'clock in the morning. I walked by the facility. I was on my way out to see what's going on outside. One of the customer came to me and says, "Let me ask you a question. Are we on generators?" I'm like, well, yeah, we are on generators for the last 4 hours or 5 hours. So I went outside, came back. A couple of minutes later, he stops me again and says, "I just want to know, is that a test or it's real?" So it was kind of a very seamless transition. If the generators work fine, it's just a quick flicker of the lights, and that's about it. So customers didn't see that. Flooding had, all our facilities are outside of immediate flood zone. In Manhattan, NY 111 8th and 60 Hudson had no problem with flooding. In New Jersey, we did have some impact. The roads leading to the facilities were impacted for a short period of time, which is NY2, NY5, and NY7 facilities in North Bergen. NY4 facility were not affected because it has multiple entry to the facility. So one street was flooded. Customers were able to get in through a different street. We did experience in NY4, we did experience one issue that was in the midst of the storm, I would say around 3, 4 o'clock in the morning when this wind really picked up. Big piece of fascia board, which is attaches to the building, wind just ripped it out, and when it's landed on the street, it made a big hole in the insulation. It went through 4 levels of the roof. So we had some water issue for one customer, and some residual water for an adjacent customer. The interesting part that word spreads around so fast, and it goes through so many multiple layers, that it was interesting to hear what's going on the street. I've heard different stories from different people. Some people were saying that, well, NY4 facility, which is 343,000 square feet, well, it's raining all over the facility. To another I saw it on the internet. Another person was saying that, oh, that facility is completely down, all the power's out, it's underwater. That's what happens. That's what happens when people start spreading rumors, and it goes through multiple layers, and by the time it goes through God knows how many layers, it just all of a sudden that's it, out of commission. So what worked well for us? Our response center, Equinix Operations Center, provided preparedness information 3 days prior to the storm, how we were prepared, that all the staff was called in, hotel rooms were secured in a walking distance so staff could go there, food, water, cots, sleeping bags, everything was provided just in case people won't be able to go to the hotel or would stay an extra hours. Management, all the management was called in, so every facility had a senior manager present. We set up, in one facility, we set up a command center. That's where we operated from. That's where I was, and we had an open communication bridge throughout. Regular updates were provided during the event through the advisories. IBX advisories were provided every 4 hours. They were specific to the facilities. All the changes were provided, and we received a lot of praises from customers on communication. We were able to respond in real time to customers' demand. What does it mean? As Dan mentioned, as Mike mentioned, fuel supplies were short. Nobody expected that major refinery in New Jersey would be damaged and shut down. All the ports were inaccessible. All the fueling stations were inaccessible for trucks. So yes, fuel deliveries were a major issue. We were able to get the deliveries. We were able to get fuel supplies. It was much easier to get 20,000 gallons of fuel delivered to New Jersey than 300 gallons of fuel delivered to Manhattan. Nobody wanted to go to Manhattan. So the challenge was at 60 Hudson, and now I know why, but there was a lot of people hanging in the lobby. I had no idea why. I guess they felt more comfortable in the lobby. Well, I found out when the truck, I was able to get a truck with 500 gallons of fuel, get there, and the truck driver came in and he said, I have fuel delivery, and guess what? It never made it to Equinix. Somebody else stole it. So somebody grabbed them and said, yeah, it's for me, and that's it. So what does he know? So next thing I know, the engineer calls me and says, where's the fuel? So that's what was happening there. So I had to scramble and get another 300 gallons somehow delivered there, but we changed the strategy, so I had my people standing there waiting for the truck, not opposite. A lot of customers, and as Dan mentioned, we have a lot of financial customers. Obviously, a lot of customers were very concerned with fuel deliveries, so questions were continuously. I had phone calls, I mean, every 5 minutes from a different customer asking what's the fuel levels in our tanks, how long the generators will run, what the loading on the generators, and stuff like that. So we were we try to be very active and proactive. So we changed the information that we provided to the customers, which we included the fuel levels, fuel delivery schedules, whatever we knew, and generator runtime. Where can we improve? What did we learn from the storm? The biggest issue that we learned is the expectations for the landlord and communications from the landlord. That was, during the outages at 111 8th, that was absolutely amazing. No communications were coming from the landlord. We had no idea what's going on, how long before they will restore the generators, what's happening. So my guy said to chase building engineers all over the building, looking for any information possible. We were getting conflicting informations, and we could not get anybody on the phone, the building manager or the higher-ups from Taconic at all. So 60 Hudson, similar. So that's That's one of the things that we need to, we already started that. We had several meetings with Taconic, Google, and they did commit it that they will provide better communications. They provided escalation list for the future, and communications will forthcoming from them, what's happening, where we are, how fast they can restore the service. We need to provide fresh, better information than just kind of like a canned messages. Everything is okay, nothing changed. It doesn't really mean much. So that's it. That's already been in the works. The advisories now will be coming with real information, not just canned messages. Infrastructure assessment at all sites, based on what happened with our generators, based on what happened with in NY4 with the roof, so all the infrastructure will be assessed in all the facilities. And also we will provide better avenues for customers, not necessarily to wait for the advisories every 4 hours, but be able to log in and see the information in real time on the Equinix blog, Equinix.com site, customer portal, as well as we had some customers complaining that our executive team was not near forthcoming and did not contact the major customers and, with updates. So that will be changed. So right now we are working on changing, assessing the infrastructure, and several projects is being assessed right now for NY8 facility. We will replace the batteries with the higher capacity batteries, as well as we are talking to the landlord right now to secure space for an additional generator and make it not an N, but N+1 site. At 111 8th Avenue, we have multiple suites there. So each suite is being looked at. Some suites will be, the batteries will be upgraded. One suite that we noticed, well, we knew about it, it just, until problem happened that people start talking about it, we will provide maintenance bypass for the UPS systems. We will also replace the generator, 1.5 megawatt generators with 2 megawatt generator, which will be able to support the load for 2 suites and use the building generators as a backup, not as a primary means of emergency power. So that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Hello. I think we all have similar slides here because we had similar experiences with the storm. So I guess, like we all alluded to, thank goodness for satellites, we all had about at least 96, maybe longer, hours before the storm hits. We had plenty of time to activate our plans, to go through our assessment of what needed to get done. For us, it was getting our employees out of the affected areas and into our other offices so that they could avoid the infrastructure issues that we knew were going to happen. So,
Michael, can you see where you're physically located?
we're actually in 2 locations in the central Jersey. So right where the storm kind of came through the middle of the state, we're just a little bit north of that. So we got pretty much the brunt of what was going on. So we moved a lot of our infrastructure, or our people that run the infrastructure, or the support people that were either in Jersey City or down in Somerset, New Jersey, out to our offices in Austin or out to San Jose to get them out of the way so we could still effectively communicate with our clients. We thought that was a good move to do to ensure that we could continue running the business as long as there was someone to answer the phone and continue to take support tickets. We booked hotels, different places for the people that were going to stay. I think one of the things we learned about that is that we also have to have hotels with generators. That seemed to be somewhat of a challenge because a lot of the generators in the hotels hadn't been run or hadn't been tested for God knows when. So although you could get a hotel room, you could get one without a generator, which somewhat defeated the purpose. We had to stock up on a lot of supplies. I can tell you from personal experience that after like the 3rd day of no power down in central Jersey, it was getting pretty tense with the public. There's no traffic lights, there's no power, there's no air conditioning. Your hotel room doesn't have any power. You can't buy food. I walked into several restaurants, TGI Fridays and things, and tried to get a meal, and I could get a beer and wine. If I was still in college, I think that'd be great, but there was nothing to eat. So there were some challenges there with food. So, one of the post-mortem things for us was finding a way to stock up some water and some food for the people that were going to be left behind. which we eventually did. We talked about, we also have locations worldwide, so we also had our staff augment the East Coast by working longer shifts in London as well as in Hong Kong to kind of overlay the efforts there to ensure our client base was still being serviced correctly. So there was a lot of long hours for those guys, and it was a huge help because our staff couldn't either get to work, or if they were at home, again, they had challenges with working from home without power. We augmented the people that were in the Jersey area, New York area with soft phones. So we used a Cisco IP phone system, which allowed us to interact with our staff, keep them apprised of what's going on, and they were actually very important to allow us to continue interacting with our clients, doing tickets, working with client things that for people that were unaware that there was a storm in Sandy, quite frankly. So one of the things we learned, I guess, was we have to make sure that the data center was prepared. So as soon as we got the word that there was something coming, we kind of went through our action plan of what we needed to do. So one of those things was making sure the generators were tested, making sure your employees have the ability to work remotely. So that was kind of an assessment of if you went home and you lost power, could you actually work from home? I think half the people lost power. Half those people had generators, so they were continued to have power and internet. And as time went on, we had people coming in and out of the work group to participate in the workload, which is kind of the point on the slide here. If your employees were with Comcast or Verizon, what we found was that access to their home was very spotty. So although they had power, they really couldn't participate with answering tickets or communicating with our clients. So that was somewhat ineffective. Your employees obviously don't have N+N in their home, so there was a lot of challenges with that. So making sure your employees can participate in working with the client calls, and we all alluded to the numerous amounts of calls. Although their sites were up and functional, they needed that extra little love about what was going on in the data center. Do I have to activate my business continuity plan? And if you needed enough people in the call center to ensure that you could answer those questions effectively and reassure the client that we put the proper preventative measures in place to allow things to happen to ensure their success. One of the other things that we found was when employees did come to work in Jersey anyway, there was a big challenge with getting gasoline for their cars. So there was no gas because the power was out, so the gas stations couldn't pump gas. So we ended up taking in some of our employees and putting them in hotels. And the people that were home could not get in because they didn't have gas in their cars. So I think one of the leave-behinds on that is that we make sure that employees gas up their cars before the storm. We've also been looking at putting a small 1,000-gallon fuel bowser on the property so that employees that come to the data center to help work on during the storm, we can give them gas to get home and make sure their loved ones are taken care of. Site selection, that was one of the things we were talking about with Dan, making sure that the site you have is not in a floodplain. Clearly downtown Manhattan would not fall into that category. Where we are in central Jersey is in a 500 or plus year plan, so it does not get flooded. We've not seen flooded from Sandy or any of the other storms that have come through, so we're fortunate about that. Access to multiple network providers, I think you guys can really speak more to that than anybody. But for us, it's really creating a triangle around your data center so that we can go to 165 Halsey, 111 8th, and 60 Hudson, and also go south. We found we got a lot of bandwidth going down to Virginia with multiple bandwidth providers and using our dark fiber and our own internal network to try and turn up providers and move providers around to ensure we could continue to keep clients happy. So having lots of diversity, lots more than you think you need, ensured that we were able to get our clients the connectivity they demand. So we were up the entire time. We lost lots of providers like everybody, but BGP worked like it did, and we were able to fail over to all our different providers and continue to move traffic around as quickly as we could. Where our data centers are, and Dan alluded to this, we're right off the 287 kind of belt there, and it's kind of data center row there. So it's very close to 287 and 80 and 70, so it's a major thoroughfare for trucks and bringing supplies in and out. that's very important close to your data center, so that when you're ordering things, people can get to you if they have the infrastructure to get to you without crossing bridges and tunnels and things like that, which impedes their ability to do so. Another thing we thought was very important, for whatever reason, Central Jersey there's 1,000+ hotel rooms. It must have been I think the AT&T training facilities there, so I think some leftover of that is there's a lot of, a bunch of hotel rooms, which allowed us to have our employees come, stay, and there was at least 250 that they could walk to the data center. Traffic lights were out, some of the streets were flooded, and the police all over the place blocking off different intersections. Your trees were down, so even getting in your car and trying to get, not even 250 yards, you couldn't do it because you just had to walk. There was no way to get to the data center. So the diesel generators for us was a little bit different. We have about 72 hours of fuel as kind of our standard. I think we ended up with about 96 prior to the storm. We actually, I'll go along here. We work with CAT and perform inspections on all units. I think setting up your infrastructure so it's not N+1, but N+N, I think is a key. We did lose one generator during the outage for various reasons. Various parts went bad, and I think for generators and UPSs, it's not really if they're going to fail. They're definitely going to fail. It's when. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of complexities in these systems, and if you plan for an N+N, 100% rated on A and B, you roll over and you don't worry about it and you keep moving forward. I think that gave us a lot of flexibility in moving loads around as we needed to. If we lose a generator, it's not affecting client loads either on A or B, and we were able to maintain and move loads around, similar to the way you would do it in a network infrastructure. Trying to give you an analogy, if you have one issue, you fail over with a static switch, you move that load somewhere else, nobody's the wiser. We actually, before storms, we worked with our local fuel provider to rent trucks. So even though we have 72 to 96 hours of fuel on site, what we've seen in the past is a constraint on the ability to get fuel delivered. For us, we had 2 fuel trucks on site prior to the storm that we had rented with 8,000 gallons in each truck, so it gave us an extra, essentially 16 hours. So we're burning at least 1,000 gallons an hour during a storm. So we thought that having an extra 16 hours and then having 2 trucks and 2 truck drivers to go out and get more fuel to bring back would be an effective way to address the situation. So one of the things we saw during the storm, as I walked outside into the rain, was just a plethora of transformers blowing up everywhere. So the sky was just a color of an arc. 360 degrees around as I walked around in the parking lot, there was a tremendous amount of angst going on the grid in New Jersey. As soon as we saw any kind of blip, we still had utility, but it was such a poor quality. We just decided to roll off the utility and guarantee our power on our N+N infrastructure to ensure we could kind of ride through the storm. We had plenty of fuel, but we wanted to make sure that we wanted to stay on utility as long as we could because we didn't know when we were going to get fuel again after the trucks. So what we learned in our plan was that even though we had gone ahead and gotten fuel tankers and put them on site, what happened was after the power outages, and we were running for about 24, 36 hours, somewhere there, the local government ordered our fuel vendor to take the trucks back. They took the trucks and needed them for the hospitals, so it wasn't much of an argument. I had to give them to them. But we had a little hole in our plan here because now we were down to what fuel was remained in our tanks. So that was a big hole in our plan, which we had not anticipated because of the big demand. We have one of the guys that runs the facility. His cousin actually works at the Linden refinery, and came back and reported us that there was the Linden facility and the Bayonne docks were completely wiped out. So there would be no way to get the tankers are sitting in the harbor unloaded, and New Jersey was still trying to figure out how they were going to get through the legalities of moving trucks from out of state into the state. So there was a lot of things going on trying to get fuel so we could get ahead of it. We didn't know when we could get back onto the grid. We worked with our major accounts rep at PSE&G, and he didn't have any good news for us, quite frankly, for many hours, and just said, stay off the grid. It's not safe. They're still trying to cut through the wires and get the transformers off the grid so that we can get down to a place where it's safe, so you can use some of the power. That didn't happen for many hours. And all through the night, the transformers continued to explode. So as the line shorted out, or tree fell on something, or a 26,000 volt line came down or something, it just blew out everything beyond that. So that was a big challenge for us. So that's just what we went through that slide, actually, working throughout. So Plan B kind of came together quickly when I learned that I couldn't have my fuel trucks. I talked to my PSE&G rep and said, I can't get back on the grid, or I could, but it would just he would have no way of guaranteeing the quality of the power. And my fuel trucks are now gone. So I didn't know how I was going to get fuel and how long I was going to stay on diesel generator. So I quickly used the internet to find a surplus fuel truck provider in Texas. So, and I purchased an aircraft refueling truck, and I asked him, hey, could you fill it full of diesel? And he told me, it's Texas, I got lots of oil here. And he put it in fuel and drove it up. And I got an aircraft refueler because an aircraft refueler will defuel and refuel, so which gave me the flexibility to take fuel from one site and move it to the other, instead of just kind of a gravity feed into the ground. So I'm a proud owner of a 19 I don't know what fuel truck, and it just kind of gave me that extra little assurance that I could go get my fuel as I needed to. Governor Christie kind of removed some of the regulations to allow, shall we say, less than regulated trucks to move around freely to get fuel as you needed to and bring it back. So we executed on that plan to ensure that we had enough fuel. We ended up not needing to use the fuel in the truck, but I felt a lot better knowing it was there, because I had no idea at the time during that whole week whether or not power was just going to go off again. And the quality was certainly with low voltage, and I had a lot of issues with the power quality. So we've taken the truck, we've licensed it now, we've gotten CAGs for it and insurance. I can't tell you the comments I got from the lawyer when I told him I bought a fuel truck the following morning. He wasn't happy. He just, as you can imagine. So we got the legalities all taken care of on the fuel truck. It's legal now, and we're actually working with a local fuel provider to get permission to load it ourselves. And we hope to get some of the benefits of getting a wholesale price versus purchasing fuel from a provider. I don't know we're going to get an ROI on the truck in 25 years maybe, but it certainly gives us the reassurance that we can self-sustain with our M+ infrastructure and have our own fuel truck to go get fuel when we want to. I think that's what the lessons we learned from this storm. Okay. Scott.
Good afternoon. I get the benefit of being last to go and really focusing on all the themes. So we didn't actually see each other's slides, and it's actually been interesting for me just to sit through and see some of the commonalities as we've lived through the same experience. So I mentioned in my introduction that we operate in 4 regions, and 2 of these regions were in the path of Hurricane Sandy, and that's our Northern Virginia, where we actually have 7 facilities, and then we have a single facility in New Jersey. We were quite fortunate in Virginia in that our sites are primarily about 150 miles inland, and so if the storm came here and kind of really glanced us, and if you can call it a glance with 50, 60 mile an hour winds and about a couple inches of rain per hour, but far and wide we had utility anomalies, but no real sustained prolonged outages. So we consider that a minor event compared to what the rest of the Northeast experienced, and is certainly the brunt of the storm that we saw at our New Jersey site. One of the common things, as people mentioned, unlike other natural disasters like earthquakes and tornadoes, which crop up quickly, you do get some planning time, which is a great advantage with of a hurricane coming up the coast. So likewise, we prepare extensively for that, and I think one of the other themes you're going to see is that clients are information junkies, and so you need to begin communicating with them very early. Let them know that, because you'll start getting questions like, hey, do you guys know there's a hurricane coming? And we're like, yeah, we watch the news. but it gets more in depth from there, and so we'll start those communications. Yes, we know it's coming. Here's the track. Here's everything we've done, and we give them a detailed list of that, sort of to relieve some of their anxiety. So at the onset of the storm, we also know that this is going to be a prolonged event. So we established that. We told my clients, listen, I'm going to communicate with you every 4 hours. I'm going to give you a status of the site. The utility, if we're on engines, how much fuel we're burning, what my personnel situation is like, is the site accessible, are the streets passable, et cetera. And of course, if something changes in between those 4 hours, we'll give you a up-to-the-minute update. And this served to alleviate a great number of phone calls from the people who are obviously sitting there wanting to know what's going on. And I think it lets them set a protocol with their own management chain and their own customers, because sometimes we have resellers in our space. So by us providing periodic, frequent updates, they can propagate that status to their folks that need it. So in New Jersey, the storm is upon us, and we're starting to get utility fluctuations. We had a brief outage which caused an engine start. The utility came back, stabilized, we transferred back. In our particular site, we're on a dual 69 kV loop, which is fairly redundant. It means we can be fed from two different directions. Eventually, we lost one side. We were able to keep on utility until that one started becoming unstable and eventually went out. And subsequent to that, we ran for the next 100+ hours on our engine plant. So one of the things I want to mention is, so now that you have you don't know the duration that this storm or this outage is going to be, managing a operating generator plant for a long time, there's a lot of things. We all know that we have to have fuel to provide it. Some of the other things that might not be quite as obvious is that they also consume motor oil, and in some cases where if you have an emissions after-treatment system where you're going to try to scrub some of the pollutants out, you also need a supply of urea, which is a catalyst agent to help reduce NOx emissions. And so those are other fluids that are necessary to continue your operation for an extended period of time. So we started our event with about 100 gallons of motor oil, and actually had to replenish over 200 gallons of motor oil during our event. So even getting a fresh supply of motor oil is another consumable that you have to have consider when you're going to run for several hours. Another risk I wanted to point out is that in this particular facility, it's sort of in its early stages of loading up, so not all of our engine generators are heavily loaded. So this also introduces a new risk. Engines do not like running unload. They like to be loaded. And when they're not loaded, there's a condition where you have the ability to build up carbons, and some of these are wet carbons. You'll hear this term used in the industry, wet stacking, which means these carbons are getting built up in the exhaust stream. And the way to mitigate that is to heat the engine up or put load under it. So in all our facilities, we have a permanent load bank, and so we would rotate our load bank for about an hour every 12 hours or so, put it on there, fully load it, get it up to temperature, burn out the wet carbons, and then move to the next unit that required it. So we've heard from the other folks, and everybody knows now that fuel availability, diesel fuel availability in the New Jersey area is basically non-existent. So we implemented our secondary program, which would be to get fuel from out of state. And since we have a big presence in the Washington, Virginia area, we actually procured trucks from Maryland and Virginia and sent them up to be our fuel supply. Most of that was without event, meaning that we were able to get fuel for the most part when we scheduled it. I will tell you that we had at least one truck break down and showed up probably about 10 hours later than we thought. So that starts to give you a little pucker factor that you think, oh yeah, the truck's on its way, and you're telling your customers it's on its way, and it's not coming, it's not coming. And I did have one delivery which was not a full delivery, which I'll talk about later, which I think one of my colleagues that I helped out probably got a little partial delivery of our fuel, but that's okay. We're here to help. And lastly, I would say that another important thing is this fuel's coming off of trucks. Fuel off of a truck is always suspect. We have 2 underground 50,000-gallon tanks at this particular site, and so we would pump fuel from one tank into our engines and take deliveries in the other one, and then we have a fuel polishing system. So once we took a delivery, we polished that fuel one time and then transferred it to the tank where we would feed the engines. Again, this is, the worst thing you could do is probably get a fuel delivery and have it be contaminated and then clog your systems and get a bad batch of fuel. So let's see. I'll talk about, again, a few of the lessons learned and highlights of our system. So maybe I might have skipped the slide. So I missed the one point where, and I think you've heard this from my colleagues up here too, it's easy to plan for first-order failures. It's much more difficult in our world to plan for second-order failures. So we too had, our engines are all up and running, and we're happy. And then one of the engines suddenly gets an error, and it falls offline, takes itself offline. In this particular case, it was a communication error from its engine control unit. We inspected all the wiring, reset the unit, alarm cleared. We were able to get the engine restarted, and it continued to run the rest of the event without incident. So we only had it down for about 10 minutes. This is not a big event for us because of the level of redundancies that we have in the system. We're a little bit more than N+2 and much more so in our current loading status. So again, Murphy is alive and well. He never comes with a single event. It always comes in waves of things that you can learn from each time. So biggest things I think I'll touch upon, you heard it from all of us, communicating with either your executive and IT staff or your client base is very, very paramount. They're eager to have information. They want to know how you're doing. We too became very strangled by the gasoline shortage, meaning that it was just an unanticipated byproduct of this storm where people were just not able to get fuel. The fuel began to be rationed. We were able to, by working with our fuel provider, get a 100-gallon mobile vessel that he filled and sent to the site, and we used that then to fill our staff and our technicians' engines, and we were able to take it and go another state over and get fuel and bring it back. I'm sure that we were also stretching the Department of Transportation rules when we were doing this, but these are the type of things you do. So personal effects, we mentioned, we're a little bit more in suburbia, so we don't have probably the close proximity of walking distance to hotels. And that is also another maybe fallacy that can happen in your plan. You say like, yeah, I got all these hotel rooms. And I think Michael mentioned, hey, they don't have power. And by the way, the roads aren't passable, and it's about 5 miles from here, and people can't walk that far. So you have to plan to become a hotel yourself. So you got to have towels and pillows and blankets and soaps and plenty of food and water for people. One feel-good part of the event that came out for us was, I call it the community outreach. And we were getting phone calls from people who were becoming desperate because their local fuel suppliers were not coming through for them, and they were asking us, are you able to get fuel? Where are you getting it? And we shared our contact information and helped broker relationships for a couple other people in the data center community, and they were able to use our fuel provider to actually get fuel. And so I expect I'll get a nice round of golf from my fuel supplier because he inked many new contracts. And I think that's where some of my fuel went. And likewise, we were very much in contact with our the power linesmen and their restoration of our services, and they were out at our site several times. And we were offering them just the amenities of our facility. Do you need to come in and get dry? Do you need to take a shower? Do you need coffee, food, phones, internet, et cetera? And so they were very appreciative of that. And these guys are putting in hellacious hours under severe conditions. So everyone wants to kind of fuss at them. We do too. Like, when's it going to be on? When's it going to be on? But they also need a little tender loving care from time to time. So that was another successful program for us. And I don't know whether this played into it or not, but we got our power back about 3 days earlier than they promised. So, you know, take it for what it's worth. Maybe they're just good, but maybe we were hospitable. So I mentioned the hotels aren't good. So the other closing points, I think that we learned, we became a little bit less comfortable with the amount of some of these consumables that we'll store on site. So if we see an event like this coming again, we're probably going to increase our on-stock supplies of motor oil and diesel fuel and other things of that nature. And then I would also encourage you, what we've started doing is actually sitting down with your fuel supplier and doing some tabletop exercises. Because as much as they will promise you, yes, we're going to get you fuel, we're going to get you fuel, you're going to get you fuel, superstorms like this break the mold, and they were unprepared for the magnitude of it and what it was really staring them in the face. And lastly, as our failing self-services were becoming increasingly less dependable, we were able to have a walkie-talkie system in the building that became our primary source of communication. So those are my lessons learned from Superstorm Sandy. And I would tell you that in closing, I guess, in the themes, as data center people, we tend to be as good as the aggregate sum of our experiences. So these type of things make us better. We're kind of silver lining people like, hey, next time we're going to do this better and that better. And we often trade horror stories at our symposiums, and that's the kind of stuff we like. But thank you for listening.
I just want to thank the panelists for the level of candor that they displayed here. I think this is a lesson that our community on the network operations side can certainly take and learn from. It's very common in the data center world, as Scott said, for people to go to conferences that are specifically set up to help learn from each other and to make their systems all, you know, better as a group. That being said, does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask the panel? Josh Snowhorn with Cyrus One.
Hi, guys. I actually just have a comment, Scott. That was, you talked about sharing oil and gas or fuel with your data center neighbors. It's a great thing. When I was at Terramark, we had all the hurricanes in 2005 and Hurricane Wilma, and we actually had the undersea cable stations calling us asking for fuel. And realizing that if the undersea cables go down, we're all screwed anyway, so we decided to give them fuel. It was nice to hear you do that, though. It's a good thing. Just a comment.
Thanks, Josh. Brandon Ross with Network Utility Force.
Just building on that comment, wouldn't it be better to share oil and fuel with your neighboring hospitals?
But what does that have to do with the internet?
I don't mean give the hospitals all of your fuel. I mean, if there's a hospital nearby that you know is going to steal your fuel anyway during an emergency, perhaps you work with your hospital in advance and say, hey, how about I help you buy a huge stockpile of fuel in advance, knowing that if they run out, they're probably going to get more and more earlier than you.
Hospitals didn't need our help. They got the fuel before us.
Knowing that you might be able to go over there and snag some food yourself if they have any problems, too.
I think the idea of mutual assistance, though, is actually well said. That's, you know, generally hospitals do get first cut on this kind of stuff, but it's certainly an interesting idea.
Hi, James Ashton, Wide Open West. Do you guys have any problems with fuel intruding on fuel tanks? If you had any like lower level fuel tanks or tanks that actually where the tank got wet? We have a couple of facilities. We haven't had too much trouble getting the generators up above any type of possible water level, but we always worry about, you know, fuel tanks being a little bit too low and not being able to seal them up properly. Thank you.
Well, our fuel tanks above ground. It's a double containment fuel tank. It's a tank within a tank. We have all kinds of building management systems that is looking into the tank inside if we have any water inside. Fuel gets polished all the time. It's a continuous polishing system which continuously polishes once a month. The whole 180,000 gallons of fuel that we have on site gets polished. So we don't really have an issue with that. In the multi-tenant buildings, that's where it's a little tricky. Well, like 111 8th Avenue, landlord controls that, so we have zero control over the fuel there. In 165 Halsey in New Jersey, we have the fuel tanks. The problem is that they are obviously in a sub-basement. Again, it's an above ground tanks, and it's a double containment tanks, so we don't have these issues.
And I think these guys are too nice to say it, so I'll say it. There's a real difference in the quality you're going to find between data centers that are run by companies that provide data center services, like the ones up here, and data centers that are run by, say, a real estate investment trust that has a sideline in data centers. Because there's the idea that you can treat your one-off data centers like your other buildings and have the same quality of staff. But just like folks in here would not hire enterprise IT network engineers who know the Ethernet switch real well to do their core routing at an ISP, we wouldn't do that, just a different skill set. Similarly, the kind of folks who are up here on this panel, wouldn't hire, Joe the building engineer who's real good with the evaporative cooler, or, real good with the the HVAC, but has never seen the kind of complex power distribution systems or complex cooling systems in a data center. There is a real difference. And so many times in these multi-tenant buildings, you have a mix of highly professional critical facility staff employed by data center provider and building engineers, which are not really engineers, employed by the people who own or manage the building. And that can sometimes be a bad combination. Thank you.
Dan McGinn, Pure One Networks. I just want to say I thought it was great that you said that Michael from Equinix was mentioning that he got a contact list of his escalations for the building landlords. I just want to say that we do that as well, and one of the things we struggle in, though, is churn in other companies. So one of the things we've done to mitigate that is every year we'll just make sure to refresh the list and make sure that the contacts are valid. And I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Thank you. That's absolutely great suggestion.
In the center?
Yes, Scott Silzer from Affiliates Canada. I noticed that two of you mentioned not having fuel for vehicles, but you didn't mention moving your vehicles to diesel as opposed to petrol.
Yeah. Keep in mind, in a lot of cases, these are POVs. These are like personally owned vehicles.
Okay. And I have traded diesel for a hotel room previously as well in Toronto when we had the power outage. So it does work, and it was interesting to watch because there's two diesel trucks right there, and the hotel power just went out, and it was like, walk across the street. You have empty rooms, right? We have no power. I have fuel. So it is an option.
That's very Mad Max. Welcome to Barter Town,
David Barak, AT&T. I noticed that it seemed that the outages you were all describing were largely power related. Were you seeing other outages that were connectivity as opposed to power related?
That's largely outside the scope of the panel. We have another discussion on that tomorrow. Okay. Does anyone here want to comment on that?
I mean, yes, because if the facility went down and that's where a pop was, then sure, then we lost connectivity to that, right?
No, I mean other than power.
No, it would be whatever. The cause of it was a power outage that took down the pop, which then caused the network problem.
Okay. We heard things anecdotally from our clients, but primarily the carrier relationship is held by them. So I think that they were dealing with issues at times, but I'm probably not at liberty to say what was the the hardship that they were experiencing.
Great.
We have time for two more questions.
Yeah. Next in the center.
Thanks. Paul Zignoni from Jive Software. Mr. Parks mentioned the local order to send fuel to hospitals, and also Governor Christie's easing of the transportation rules as two examples of government action in your situation. I'm wondering if there was any other government action or inaction that either aided your situation or made it more difficult.
There is, yes, there is a Regional Operation Center, which is the we work with, it's a Homeland Security initiative, and Regional Operations Center, they've been open 24 hours, 7 days a week throughout the storm. We do work with them, and yes, they did provide assistance as needed. They were continuously contacting companies that are on their list and asking if any assistance needed with fuel deliveries. They did have, I mean, we were able to source our own, but if we wouldn't be, they were offering source of fuel.
And these will be the last 3 questions. Ma'am?
Hi, my name is Lauren Tucker from Datacenter Orlando, and my question is actually about multi-fuel system generators. So knowing what you know now from the experiences you've gone through, would you be more inclined to look at, say, a jet turbine type of generator system versus a diesel in the future?
The question was from Datacenter Orlando. They actually have jet turbines, which is kind of interesting. They can use like JP fuel. Is that something you?
Kerosene, jet fuel, and
Not normally used for backup, right? Because of the time it takes to come up to speed and get them to.
That can be mitigated with batteries without issue.
Is that something you guys have ever thought about?
And usually you can use JP4, but a lot of times the ones that are on the market are natural gas, so that becomes a challenge if you don't have natural gas too. So it's possible, sure.
My question was.
Yeah, I mean, natural gas has some appeal to it because it has some abundance of availability, but it's I think you already mentioned it's difficult to store, which makes people a little bit uncomfortable. It is probably has some emission favorability to it. You know, it's probably worth pointing out that like we talk about the importance of diesel generators and we all love them and we want to hug them and everything, but the EPA is at war with our stationary devices because they can very much regulate it, and they are very interested in eliminating all pollutants that come out of it and particulates.
And the state of California in particular as well is really murderous. You know, it's interesting on the jet turbines. I don't think they've seen a lot of traction up to this point because they're very, very expensive. They're not, you know, in your case, you guys sort of inherited them, which was cool. And there's some operating characteristics people are not familiar with. I think the idea of using natural gas over the next few years, however, might see a little more traction.
So let's move to the next question.
Yes.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Jim Glenn from Sabi Data Centers. My first NANOG was a data center operator. One of the things that we're in the middle of commissioning our building in Manhattan when Sandy hit, and one of the things that took us by surprise, a little bit like you, we had 96 hours warning, but Con Ed seemed to be not quite as well prepared as we were. I mean, we were told 24 hours we'd take power out, and an hour later, power was gone. One of the things I'd like to look at doing with you guys is seeing if we can work cooperatively in Manhattan to get a better handle on Con Ed and how we can be better prepared if this happens again. Any thoughts and comments on Con Ed?
Nobody has or will have any handle on Con Ed. That's a difficult animal on its own. You can try, you can have regular meetings, but I don't think so. You will ever have a true and forthcoming information from them.
And then the last thing that happened to us is staff. Like I said, when you guys made a staff plan, staff in the property left them there, they were well prepared until their houses were damaged in New Jersey. And then we're faced with staff having, you'd love to keep them on site to help you, but really they have to go back to their families. And that was a big impact for us as well. So.
All right, next question. We need to wrap it up.
So, yeah, Danny McPherson, this was actually touched on a bit earlier. I was just going to ask, and I think I heard this in some of your discussions about critical infrastructure and key resource classification, and if you do any, periodic planning with folks like DHS, NCC, their emergency support functions, those things, and because I think a lot of what I heard is about some of the interdependencies of other externalities as opposed to just your own operations. And so I was just wondering what your take is on that, and if DHS or others have been helpful in that manner. Duly noted.
Yeah, I'm not sure if is anyone willing to comment on that. It's tricky because you can make all the agreements you want with federal bureaucrats and local bureaucrats in advance. And I'll say this because right now, unlike these guys, I'm not running a data center. You can make all those deals that you want, but when a disaster hits, they're all out the window.
All right.
Just the thing is, the reason hospitals or other folks get fuel in these events is because of that planning and those functions. So you might want to consider what that means to your business. Is all I'm saying.
Thanks, everyone.
Well, we do work with government authorities to the extent possible. Obviously, they don't go into exercises with us or anything like that. But what we do is simple things like all our employees have a card that will allow them to get on the road in emergency situations. Little things like this. Again, get on their list of primary mission-critical facilities. They will assist when possible, like I said, in the fuel deliveries or any other things close to that. They do periodically check with us if we need anything, if anything that they can help us with and stuff like that. But doing exercises, it's a little tricky.
Yeah, I mean, I think pretty much every major data center is designated as critical infrastructure by federal or state or local authorities. It's just, when push comes to shove sometimes, the question becomes, what does that really get you? And frequently it doesn't get you as much as you think it would. So,
all right.
Guys, I'd like to thank our panel. I'd like to thank our panel for their great work. Thank you today.